Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coming Clean with the Dirty Dozen, where we put the finest explorers into your living room twice a week. My name is Aron Arngrimsson, and I'm going to be your host tonight. And tonight is our 11th episode, actually our season finale before we take a break. So welcome to the episode, and let's get started. Before we introduce our special guest, I just want to bring us down to the crew backstage and say hello and say thank you for all their hard work. Jeff, Vic, how are you?
Hi. Well, thanks.
All good? Have you guys been diving yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet? How are you feeling about the season finale? Are you ready to get back out to normal life?
Yeah, we get to take a bit of a break, but I'm sure we'll be back with more.
What about you, Vic? All good?
Already looking forward to season 2.
Excellent. Nice one. I'll see you guys in a bit, okay?
See you in a bit.
So that was Jeff Crichton. He's our operator, doing it from Chepstow. And you have Victoria Brown. She's our producer and content creator. Just remember that at any point during the show, you can send in questions in the comment section in the live stream itself. And then a couple of times during the show, Victoria will come in and ask Kev the questions. So yeah, our special guest tonight is none other than a good friend of mine, Kevin Gurr. So I have a little bit of bio about him that I'm going to read before we get started. And this was originally actually printed in the 6th edition of Aquacore, a magazine that many of you surely know. And where Mr. Michael Menduno, the man that coined the word technical diving, wrote, Kevin Gurr has been passionate about computing and rebreathers since his first rebreather dive in 1987. This prolific British explorer, tech instructor, and engineer got his start rebuilding the electronics for the Biomarine CCR 155, one of the first mixed gas rebreathers to be adopted by sport diving divers. From there on out, he went to build on the first Nitrox dive computer, the Ace Profile, in 1991, before most divers could even spell Nitrox. He sold several hundred units and planned to add a data logger, a gas sensor, onboard analyzer, and look-ahead capability, but the project got shut down for the lack of funding. 2 years later, he released a well-known Pro Planner desktop decompression software to address the needs of the emerging technical diving market. From then on out in 1997, Kevin rolled out the world's first mixed gas diving computer, the legendary VR3, which he manufactured and distributed through his newly formed company, VR Technology Limited, based in Dorset, UK. The VR3 quickly became the computer of choice among technical divers, and it remained so for more than a decade. Thousands of hours of diving later, 3 rebreather designs, TV shows, books, and many other things, Kev has been finding himself leading missions to the Lusitania, the Britannic, and the Titanic. Kevin currently works as the Maritime Technology Officer managing military rebreathers at Avon Protection. So without any further ado, I think it's time we cut over to Kevin. Where are you, buddy?
Hey, Aron, how you doing? I'm good. Great.
Yeah, I'm doing really well, man. It's the last episode. It's good to have a good friend on and an hour of a lot of things to talk about. Where are you at the moment?
I'm at home in sunny Dorset, and it is very, very sunny. I live in a little village just north of Poole in Dorset, and I can just about see the sea from my house, so that keeps me pretty sane.
Excellent. So how is lockdown like where you are in the UK? We obviously had guests from all over the world, and they've been describing to us how things are going as they're happening. How is it going now as you're lifting some restrictions?
Yeah, it's definitely changing. You know, there's a lot more cars on the roads. I did quite a bit of running, and for a few weeks I didn't see a car and hardly saw anyone else. But yeah, the vehicles are creeping back up, and obviously all the beaches are kind of opening up, although not in a great way sometimes. But yeah, definitely moving forward, which is a good thing. You know, the economy and everything else needs to get itself together as long as people are real careful and we don't get a second wave.
Yeah, talking about business, you're obviously working at Avon Protection right now. How's work?
Work's really the same for me. It hasn't really changed. You know, the global militaries of the world don't particularly stop during this sort of event, especially the teams that I deal with. So that's still going on, and Avon has other elements to the business other than underwater. Obviously, we do a lot of respiratory protection, so we've been working with the NHS on some COVID protection systems, that kind of stuff.
Oh wow!
So it's it's pretty dynamic still. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, I usually ask guests any cool projects risen out of the lockdown, and I guess if you're providing equipment to the NHS, you can call that a cool project. All right.
Yeah. Between that and DIY, that certainly takes up most of the time. I think I'm a bit like you. You know, I travel a lot, so when I do get time to get a gap at home, there's always a big list of stuff to do. And couple that with the love of motorcycles, and you kind of got a full house, you know.
Yeah, I was hearing that the women in your life have been slaving you around around the house, in the yard, and the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the daughters and the wife. Yeah.
So we kind of got a little bit of the pleasantries over. So it's kind of, without any further ado, for the last time this season, it's time for Kevin. It's time for you to come clean with the Dirty Dozen. So you're in the hot seat. Mm-hmm. Let's get straight into it. This is something that a lot of people are probably curious in. What was your introduction to diving like, and who trained you?
Okay, I think we need to go back quite a way in time to get the introduction thing. So I'm going to introduce you to someone now. Okay. So,
all right.
So this is Bob. Oops, there he is. So some of you guys may recognize Bob. Bob is an action man deep sea diver. So when I was very young, 6, 5, something like that, I can't remember. In our house, we didn't have hot running water, so a bath was a major event because it meant boiling water and all that kind of stuff. So once a week, whether I needed it or not, I kind of had a bath. And I think it was fairly tricky to keep me in the bath. It's tricky to make me do most things, but certainly keep me in the bath. So my mother decided to bring some entertainment in. So Bob here, what he does is you got these little air hole things in the back, and he's got his proper lead boots, and these are real lead as well. You can't get toys like this anymore. So basically you submerge Bob, and then you blow in the tubes, and then his suit inflates and he comes back to the surface. So that fascinated me for years, probably, I would think. Sadly, that isn't the original Bob. That's Bob 2.
All right.
He's still very dear to me. But anyway, I then got a kind of teenage life, and for some bizarre reason wanted to be an architect. So never even thought about diving, to be completely honest with you. So the first ever introduction, the first ever go at any sort of diving was on one of these kind of lads' 20s holiday things in Corfu. And I was coming back from one of the clubs very early in the morning, as you do when you go on those kind of events. And there was this mad Irishman throwing people in the sea after a 1-minute lecture on scuba gear and taking a crispy £10 note off them. And I watched it for a bit and eventually went, I need to have a go at this. This looks great. So tried to give him my crispy £10 note. And he kind of said, I think you've had a little too much to drink. Maybe come back tomorrow. So anyway, the next night, usual stuff. Didn't stay out quite so late. Went back the next day, gave him the crispy £10 note, had the 1-minute lecture on how to clear your ears. And that was it. And, quite honestly, the first thing I remember is getting underwater and suddenly it was space. It was just the same. You're weightless. All these new creatures are around. It was really, really an amazing experience from the get-go. So the next day I went back, and the next day I went back, and the next day I went back, and eventually the guy would just say, "Oh, there's a tank over there with a couple of PSI gas, just go and knock yourself out," kind of thing. So that was kind of the baptism. And then moving on from there, I think Richie Kohler mentioned the other week in his cast that the British Tobacco Club has this kind of mentoring system. So you join the club, you spend weeks and weeks and weeks in the swimming pool doing all these survival skills. The same we did back then. This was when you became, a third-class diver after you'd done your 6 months of training or whatever it was.
Sure.
So in our club, there was one particular guy, a guy by the name of John Saddington, who was the diving officer in the club around the time that I joined. I think after the first year, he became the diving officer. But him and a couple of his buddies, for some reason, took me under their wing. And so my first dive in England was in a wetsuit in March in exactly 7.7 degrees of water. And I know this because I just bought a Casio watch with a temperature sensor on it.
Yeah.
And then having gone through that baptism of fire, that was just a shore dive, actually locally to here, a place called Stairhole. You kind of scrabble down a bit of a cliff and then go out through a hole in the rocks, and then you're in the channel. So that was a baptism of fire. And then they decided I'd kind of, hadn't panicked and I looked reasonably calm and all that kind of thing. So the next dive was we got a trawler out of Poole Harbour, I think it was. Went about 4 or 5 miles in a 4.6 in a very tiny trawler, 30 meters of water. So dive number 2 is 30 meters of water in the English Channel, reasonably strong current on a wreck called the Carentan. And the Carentan was a Free French submarine destroyer. And she was loaded with munitions. I spent 20 minutes, 20 minutes, not having a clue what I was doing or where I was or why I was there. On returning to the surface, I promptly vomited over my dive partner, John. And then he told me I'd spent 15 minutes sitting on a depth charge. So
wow,
that was kind of the introduction to British diving, really.
That's pretty intense. I know we have to fast forward quite a while here. But how long was it from then on out before you discovered your interest in rebreather diving?
Yeah, so the whole rebreather thing really came about because at the time I was working in professional television. I was a broadcast systems engineer, so I used to design, TV stations, outside broadcast vans, that sort of thing. And I worked for a company, and a friend of mine, another engineer that worked with me, a guy called Nick Bushell. He was very, very good at software and electronics. I was kind of the mechanical design guy, And a friend of mine in diving had an incident with a high pressure hose where it ruptured and it split his hand fairly badly. He had a bit of damage to his hand. So I came up with this smart idea that we could develop a high pressure gas sensor that would electronically read the pressure, and then you wouldn't need a hose and a gauge and all that kind of thing. So having done that bit of work with my friend Nick, we realized actually we had enough brains to make a dive computer. Now at the time, the only real commercially available computer was the Decabrain, that monstrous thing you used to strap to your wrist.
Yeah.
And obviously the person behind the decompression algorithm was Professor Bullman. So I read his books and I basically started writing to Bullman, and very graciously he wrote back to me, and I phoned him a few times and we talked. And really he helped us develop the first computer system that we did. It was really before the ACE profile. It was another one before that. We never really sold any. It was tool free. It was more, I needed it, so we made a computer kind of thing. So that in itself, that electronic project, then Nick and I started a little company, and we got approached by a UK manufacturer that was quite visionary, really. They had some old Navy Mark 15.5 rebreathers, which is a hybrid between the Mark 15 and the Mark 16. And what they wanted to do is develop new electronics for those rebreathers. So we put together an electronics package, and then the image you can see there is actually my first rebreather dive. So that picture was taken by Rob Palmer. That is Rob Palmer's terrible mask and Rob Palmer's dry suit,
which is terrible as well.
Neither of which kept water out. So that is 15.5, and you can see the white duct tape that's basically holding it together. The rather large computer display on the wrist was part of the electronics that we started to put together. So that was dive number 1. That was 6 meters in Plymouth Sound near Fort Bothersand. And Fort Bothersand used to have a research facility there called the Diving Diseases Research Center, and they had recompression chambers. So being one of the engineers associated with this and a diver, I was then told I need to become one of the test divers. So I ended up doing quite a long series of dives within DDRC, A, checking the units out, B, looking at heliox tables. So dive 1 was 6 meters, dive 2 was around 100 meters, something like that, in the chamber systems. So as you say, that was a bit of a baptism of fire as well on the closed circuit side to go from one to the other. But
blimey, that's one hell of a story. So wait, what year are we in now, and what happens next?
well, this is about 88, really, 87, 88, that kind of time frame. What happens next? I needed to get a commercial diving qualification. So in order to be able to do some of the diving I wanted to do, from a product research point of view, all that kind of stuff, I needed to get that. I also quite like the idea of commercial diving. There were all sorts of things you could do with it, aside from, archaeology and all that kind of stuff. So to get the ticket was basically quite important. Yeah. And also, I was aware of mixed gas because of the rebreathers, but we hadn't really done much with it. Certainly in open ocean, we'd only done all these different chamber dives and some shallow stuff. So I realized that certainly using oxygen and nitrox and things like that would be very, very beneficial in the commercial world. So within the UK at the time, obviously the North Sea was heavily populated with divers, saturation diving, all that kind of thing. I didn't really go down that route at all, certainly not that point in my career. But we started working, basically doing wreck salvage. So a lot of the things we did were, a bit of history, a bit of research, a bit of scanning, go out, find a wreck, purchase the cargo and do the salvage. So one of the kind of cool things you end up finding when you do that sort of stuff is one of these. So
blimey,
this weighs 8 kilos. It's a copper ingot from a wreck in 36 meters in the Bristol Channel. So if anyone has ever dived the Bristol Channel, they will know it is one of the lowest visibility sections of sea on the planet, and it's one of the highest currents as well. I think it's got the second highest tidal range. I believe the highest is in the Philippines. So you had a couple of short tidal windows, and basically you had about 25 minutes to handball 1 ton of 8 kilo ingots into a basket. So that's a pretty stressful event to do that. So to help us, we started using nitrox, we started using oxygen decompressions, and we didn't really know what we were doing. We weren't particularly educated in that, and there's a few sub-stories and things that go on from that. But the bottom line is, after that, I realized I needed to know more, and I realized the US was the place where a lot of this stuff was starting to happen.
It's funny you say it like that, because 20 years later, I was in north of Scotland using electricity, getting razor clams. And that's kind of when I first started to realize I needed to use nitrox 6 hours in the water a day. So yeah, definitely needed. So tell us a little bit about homegrown gas and how it all came about.
Well, that was us with it came out of the commercial diving side of things, but then after that, once I'd actually gone to the US, met Tom Mount and the kind of INTD crew, Dick Rutowski, Brett Gillam, those guys, Shek Exley, then coming back to the UK and start to train Trimix and train Nitrox. So there was a couple of mixed gas dive groups in the UK. The Tapsons had Paul and Simon Tapson had the Starfish Enterprise team. We had a mid-channel rec team on the south coast. So there's a group of us used to go out most weekends, try mixed diving, and when we very early phases of it, it wasn't that easy to get gas, wasn't that easy to use the right oxygen, all those sort of things. So you were kind of making it up as you went along to a certain extent. But then these gas trips were amazing. You know, literally every couple of weeks we would be diving a new wreck. They were really quite impressive. And some of the things we found mid-channel in the 60, 70, 80 meter range were amazing. Really.
Just to clarify for some of our viewers, so when the European Association of Technical Divers was formed by you, Richard Bull and Rob Palmer in 1992, which merged into INTD the following year, what instructor number do you have with INTD? Curious.
Excuse me. I'm international number 6. So I think the chronology, and I could be wrong on this, I think the sequence is Rutowski, Tom Mount, Brett Gillam. Oh, sorry, missed one. Rutowski, Tom Mount, Billy Deans. Sorry, Billy. Brett Gillam, Sheck Exley, and myself. I believe that's the sequence. I could be off, but yeah, so pretty early on. It was interesting times. It weren't particularly structured. Most of the training took place at Tom's house. You'd kind of rock up and fight your way through the rock wireless, sit around, chat about diving a bit. You know, someone will say, "Hey, I've been doing this. Oh, you're still alive, okay, that's really cool. Well, tell me about the way you do it." You know, and then we'd kind of build on that. And then out of that, obviously, came training manuals, INTD in the UK, Europe, all the other franchises and everything else that came out. So very cool.
So you were speaking about a little bit previously how mixed gas diving was starting in the UK and the rest of it. But if we rewind just a little bit, what was it like bringing technical diving to the unsuspecting UK and European dive market at all? Was it met with some skepticism, hostility, or the rest of it?
What was kind of fun was, in the main, certainly in the UK and the US to a greater extent as well, that the equipment manufacturers kind of bought into it quite early. So, you know, the harness people, the light people like Custom Divers in the UK and others. Obviously, APVR was very early on bought into the rebreather thing as well. So that was quite exciting. That was very good. We initially thought we were going to get a lot of problems with a health and safety executive, but actually they were quite proactive about it. And we, Rob and I and Richard, helped them generate new diving codes of practice, did some work with that. So that sort of moved on quite well, really. The challenge was with the gas suppliers and with the recompression facilities. I mean, I can remember going to Malta once and then being told that we were not allowed to dive on Nitrox in Malta because they didn't know how to recompress us. So we had all sorts of weird stuff going on like that. But the farther afield you travelled, you know, outside of the US or the UK, it just got weirder when you were trying to get gas or whatever it was. But it did ramp up fairly quickly, to be fair.
So one of your accolades is building the world's first mixed gas diving computer, the VR3, in 1997. So can you tell us a little bit about the process of building it, and were you surprised when it took off the way it did?
Well, actually, the first Nitrox computer really was 92. So when Nick and I started the company, the first Nitrox Workshop in the States at DEMA. That's all of them there, I think. Yeah, it is. At DEMA in the States. So DEMA had banned Nitrox. And this is when I first met Mike Menduno. So Mike set up the Nitrox Workshop off to the side of DEMA. And, you know, there was a panel of amazing people there, Tom and Billy and Bill Hammer and all those kind of people. And then an audience of divers, basically. And I was the one non-US citizen, I think, in the audience of divers. So we had 2 or 3 days, I think it was, of trying to set some standards, make some rules, agree some stuff. And then I obviously talked to Tom and that about INTD from there. So, but at that conference, we had already developed a dive computer. And actually, we'd sold some computers to NOAA in the States, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. So that's the one in the top right-hand corner of that picture there. So that was that was nitrox only, that one. The one in the top left was absolute alpha number 1. Even that one had a high pressure sensor. That had a digital high pressure sensor. So that was the very, very first one that we did. Then we moved into the middle one on the left is the early VR3 brick. And then you get into the VR3 and the VR2 and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's kind of the chronology of all of those.
It's so interesting to when you go through the chronology of the whole things. You know, when voodoo gas was still banned. You know, this is almost 30 years ago, and even today, you know, we had one of our guests, Kirk Crack, 2 episodes ago. You know, he's pushing technical freediving a lot, where they're using mixed gases in freediving, doing incredible runtimes. And he's very much being met with the same hostility as the scuba diving industry was 30 years ago. So it's just funny to see the full circle kind of still happening in that sense.
Well, anything that's new is often scary for people. You know, I think you always hit that scenario. And, you know, it takes time to push through it and hopefully try and lead by example a little bit. And that's kind of what it's all about, I think. But, you know, in the end, we ended up the way it kind of evolved. Initially, the people taking the courses were very much of the explorer intent. You know, they wanted to do a lot of exploration themselves. And then that slowly started to widen out into a wider group. So people saw the benefits of it just to go a little deeper, a little longer, look at stuff they'd never seen before, spend more time. You know, it became more into the mainstream.
Absolutely. Just by the way, I'm seeing through the public feed, you're getting lots of love from some old friends. Michael Menduno is saying, "Hey, Kev." Richie Kohler is saying hello as well. There's a few others.
Just a minute. Richie, I found this in the skip the other day. I'm really sorry.
Excellent. So let's fast forward a little bit. I think we're getting to 97 now. So as the first sport diver on the Britannic, you did the Lusitana beforehand as a warm-up dive. So tell us a little bit about that whole process. And for the audience, just remember you can ask questions for Kev as we carry on.
So there were obviously other divers on Britannic before us. Cousteau was the one that, you know, logged it, found it in the first place, and then did that amazing sequence of dives on it. And you can watch the videos of that. And it truly is amazing. Locking back into the bell at 50 meters and doing all the surface deco and everything. Then there was a Greek guy's name I sadly can't remember anymore. I believe he was a commercial diver, and I think it was kind of a, you know, one-off bounce dive on the wreck. And then, as you say, in 97, I put together a group to go out there. So the Lusitania element of that story was Al Wright and Al was on the expedition in 97 with me. We decided we need to, you know, do a bit of workup basically for this sort of thing. So we were doing gas diving in the Channel and in Northern Ireland. And we had an opportunity through a friend of mine in Ireland, a guy called Des Quigley, who had a license to dive the Lusitania. And bear in mind, this is you know, pretty quickly after the first sequence of dives on it, the Irish government locked it down. It got very difficult to dive. So Des had a license to dive it. And then John Griffiths from OMS, the equipment manufacturer in the US, he approached us about diving it as well. So it was a bit of an opportunity to put together a little mini project, really. And Al and I just needed to get some depth, to be honest, in a, you know, reasonably harsh environment. So that's how the Lusitania came about. So yes, it was a warm-up dive, but you can't belittle it for what it is. You know,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's quite an event, obviously. But then moving into Britannic, the challenge for Britannic was basically it was lost. So no one other than the Cousteau Foundation knew where it was, and the Admiralty charts put it, I think, something like 12 miles away from where it actually is. So in Greece at the time, I had trained the first group of Greek technical divers, a guy called Alexander Sotirio and his brother Manthos, and a couple of their friends. So we decided we'd spend a week looking for it before we do the major expedition. It's got to be a good thing to do, see if you can find it, etc.
Yeah,
So
sure.
before we can drag the 20-odd man team out there. So the kind of unknown story of the whole event, really, I think, is we went out there, and Alexander had a small boat, so I think it was a 5 or 6 meter inflatable, something like that. We had no idea where we were going to be looking in the Kia channel. We had a couple of visual references by looking at the Cousteau videos and took some guesses and things, and we ended up fairly close to the island of Kia trying to search with what turned out to be a totally inadequate echo sounder. So once you got past 70 meters, it kind of died. So we were getting towards the end of the week, and as all good wreck divers do, when you can't find what you're looking for, you go ask a fisherman. So we saw this guy who was fishing in the area, a nice little white boat, and kind of went across and said, hey, do you fish any big wrecks around here? Because it's pretty big. And he went, yeah, there's one. I fish it all the time. Yeah, I'll find it for you. So we started driving around in circles. And bear in mind, this is the day before I have to leave. So this is like day 4. Eventually, after all day of doing this, he comes out and says, can't find it. I said, what do you mean you can't find it? You fish all the time. Said, yeah, I fish it at night. At night, there's lots of lights on the land, and I can triangulate. I can find it. Oh, okay.
No pressure at all.
Right. I'll go. No, he says, right, tonight I'll go out and I'll mark it for you, and tomorrow morning you can dive it. Be up early. So we spent the night, all of us just sleeping in the bottom of the boat, which was obviously really good for a following day's deep dive. So we went out of the harbour, and there was one tiny little white float, and I mean tiny, that hadn't been there the day before. So it's like, well, this is it. We've got to do it. And Alexander and Kirk and I, who was one of the other guys who were with us at the time, we bounced in and got to around, I think, 80 meters, something like that. And people always say, "Oh, what's it like the first time you see something like that?" And it truly was heart-stopping. It, your kind of heart's racing a little bit, and you got that different taste in your mouth and all that kind of stuff. No, and all I could see was wreck going out into the distance. I've dived some big liners, but this was a big liner.
Oh yeah.
So we did about 4 hours of deco, something like that. 15-minute bottom time, 20-minute bottom time, I can't remember. On the inadequate gases, obviously, because it was a bit of a jury rig thing. So then I had to fly in the evening. So I needed as much oxygen as I could possibly get. So it's kind of, okay, I need oxygen in the boat, I need oxygen in the taxi, I need oxygen when we get to the airport. And then you get on a plane and you just sit there for a couple of hours going, I really hope this doesn't hurt. So, wow. Then we went back with the crew. Sorry, go on.
No, so I mean, I was just thinking to myself, 23 years ago now, and you said the visibility was good, and I just can't imagine the condition of the wreck, what it was, maybe compared to today. Must have been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not dived it recently, but it was very, very intact. Apart from the break in the bow section, very intact. But we were lucky when we went back. I think we did 26 man dives while we were there as the team. We had 1 week of atrocious weather, but we managed to dive the rest of the time. We had a very, very small fishing boat that we worked off. We ran surface supplied oxygen because by that kind of time I've been doing a bit of work with Billy Deans in the States, and he used to run a lot of surface supplied O2 systems. So this whole trapeze you see here is set up with surface supplied oxygen, and it floated in the water under the support boat. So yeah, it was a good trip. We found the mine chain, the sequence of mines. We actually found the bow section that had been blown off. It's off to the north. I was lucky enough to manage to borrow a military grade sonar system, which helped us do a lot of the survey that we did. I've still got some of those scans, I think. So pretty successful trip, really, all in all. When we got to Kia, there was absolutely nothing there. There was nowhere to fill gas. There was no electricity. We took over the ambulance station and hot wired a compressor in, all this kind of stuff. That's the plaque you see there. Sadly, just before the trip, Cousteau had died. So what I did was I contacted the family and asked if I could put a plaque down to Cousteau. So we agreed some wording with his wife, and then that thing there weighed, I think it's 56 pounds, something like that. Bearing in mind, it's already strapped to a set of double 20-litre tanks. So there's a whole life and death story behind that. But basically, John Thornton, my dive buddy, ended up cutting me out of it, so I didn't stay on Britannic forever.
I know exactly what you mean, because we carried a memorial plaque on a wreck at 100 meters in Iceland as well, and there's a very funny story behind that as well. It's not a very common thing to do, I guess.
No. It was quite funny. After the event, I met the Cousteau's dive crew, and they were, because we did reasonably long dives compared to them. They were doing like 10-minute bottom times, 15-minute bottom times, and we had much better camera gear as well and video gear. So I met with some of the guys and showed them some of the video and things. And there was, I can't remember the guy's name now, but one of the really big French guys in the team. I was showing him all this stuff, and he's going, "Oh, very good, very good." And then when everyone had kind of gone after this was one of the demon shows, everyone had kind of wandered off. He sort of came up to me and he pulled me aside and went, "Hey, did you take anything?" I went, "No, we didn't take anything from the wreck, you know."
And he was disappointed, I'm sure.
Yeah, he just kind of smiled and walked off. So I'm not sure if they took stuff or not.
Actually, we have a comment here from kdiving.fi. They were saying they remember reading about that Britannic trip in college. And because of this, we had an O2 bar built in Finland. Well, there you go.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So since we're on the subject of the Britannic, I think we should, even though it's a bit of a jump, kind of jump over to the sister ship and your dive on the Titanic. So Richie Kohler, we were speaking with him earlier about his experience on it. But I'm now we have a second person that's been on it, and you have a unique perspective on how you were experiencing Titanic. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so through Britannic, I met Carl Spencer and started working with Carl Spencer. Obviously, Carl sadly lost his life on Britannic a few years ago. But Carl and I did several projects together over the years, and one of the things we kind of hatched, there it is, yeah. One of the things we hatched was we wanted to go back to Britannic, but we wanted to do it in SAT, so saturation diving. So the reason why the Ouroboros rebreather was developed was to be able to do untethered saturation diving. So we would take a bell down to near enough 100 meters, something like that, operate out of the bell, come back to the bell, store it 100 meters on the surface, go back, do it again the next day. So it was all about building a rebreather that would give us 4 to 6 hours on the wreck. So that's what we wanted to do, just go out of a bell, swim around for 4 or 6 hours. So Carl and I ended up with a couple of other people doing saturation diver training in Fort William. So we did some basic SAT stuff to kind of get us in some of the knowledge that we needed. We started looking at all the funding for it and everything else. Now at that time, James Cameron was also looking at doing Britannic work. He'd already been there once. And we were kind of trying to work together to get some funding and all that kind of thing. That sadly fell through for a variety of reasons. And then one day, Carl and I get an email from James Cameron basically saying, "Would you like to dive Titanic?" So James worked with another well-known Australian diver who also now is sadly dead, Andrew White. And we between us, the trip was organized, but for Carl and I, it was really all about going to a sister ship of the Britannic and spending as much time as possible on the bottom to work out the layout, the access points, what we could actually do the next time we went back into SAT. So it doesn't obviously take away that the experience and uniqueness of going to Titanic is absolutely fantastic. And Richie and I talk about this whenever we meet. We are in a very, very exclusive club, and we fully appreciate this, and it's an amazing experience. And not just for the actual wreck itself, but the whole Russian Mir thing is quite an experience. You
I can
you
imagine.
kind of rock up on day one. They give you your Nomex suit. You all stand in a room. Someone talks in Russian for half an hour. They give you a piece of paper written in Russian, which is the waiver. You sign it without reading it, because there's no point in trying to read it unless you speak Russian. And then the next thing you know, you're in a submarine going 2.5 miles underwater. So how hard can it be?
That oh man, it must have just been an incredible experience. There is so much ground to cover yet, and we have limited amount of time, so I'm going to have to jump away from this for a little bit. It's time to talk a little bit about treasure hunting. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you met Billy Deans.
Yeah. So again, this was kind of post 97. So obviously, we did Britannic on open circuit. We didn't really have access to rebreathers then, despite the earlier stuff that I'd done. But I had an element of rebreather experience. So Billy was working on a archaeology/treasure diving project in Guam, a Spanish galleon project. And he wanted to start using rebreathers because they were going deeper. They were doing very long dives. Most the average working depth was 65, 70 meters. You were down there with water dredges, all this kind of thing, heavy lifting, moving survey gear around, moving anchors around. So again, pretty stressful. And rebreathers were ideal. So he managed to rent again some 15.5s. Now I believe I'm right in saying they came from Pete Reedy, who's another name in the industry, obviously. So I'd known Pete from very early on, from 1988, really, or just past that date. So anyway, Billy got hold of some rebreathers, and then he needed some rebreather divers. So he'd heard about me through NTD. He'd heard about people like Wingstocks who had experience in that sort of thing as well. So that's me on the right there. The guy on the left is a gentleman called Andy Matrosi. Now, Andy lives in Key West in Florida, where Billy lives, and Billy had his tech diving shop down there. So Andy is the guy that swam into the Etosha Motherlode. So he was one of the divers working for Mel Fisher, and on one particular dive day, they were surveying an area, and he managed to find the Motherlode of the Etosha. So a massive pile of silver and obviously other stuff. And he still works for the Fisher group now in Key West. He's still a boat captain down there. He doesn't really dive anymore like he used to, but he's still looking for the rest of the Etosha. So this thing in Guam kicked off, which was basically over 5 years for me. We used to go for 3 months a year. I think it was 1 year we didn't go for some reason. But you would basically do 1 to 2 dives a day, depending on the severity of the dive. If it was just a 50-meter dive, then you might do an hour's bottom time. If it was a 70-meter dive, you might do 40 minutes, that kind of thing. And then you'd end up also doing very, very long survey runs. So, the dive days could be 4 to 6 hours, something like that. And this is where this type of rebreather became very, very useful. Now, the only downside of this type of rebreather is the electronics is abysmal on them. So you can see on my wrist there, there's a little yellow Nitek computer, one of the early dive right Nitek things, and then just above that there's a secondary from the rebreather. So that was basically an analog gauge, and you flicked it around, sensor 1, sensor 2, sensor 3, and you could see the 3 PO2 sensors. So we dived on tables. We had tables, and the bottom line was you looked at the gauge, you pushed the oxygen button, or you died. And that was the kind of mindset you got into. And it was quite weird when you get a pair of you working together, and we always work together as a team. So one of you's on the water dredge, one is hauling rocks out. The other guy, you could watch the diver doing the water dredge, who's now totally engrossed in what he's doing. And after a few seconds, you'd see him just reach around and hit his oxygen ad. And barely look at the gauges. You just got so in tune with the rebreather, you'd sense the loop volume drop very slightly, and you could keep these things pretty accurate, plus minus 0.1 PO2. So we were doing these long manual dives on these rigs, hours and hours and hours on manual for months and months at a time, kind of thing. but they were a brilliant weapon of choice. And one of the reasons we needed what was basically a non-magnetic system. This picture here is this had various names. One of them was Tinker Toy for some reason. I can't remember why. But so this is a pulse induction metal detector. So the point is, you have to be magnetically clean. Now, these rebreathers were developed for mine warfare, so they are magnetically clean. So we would push this thing around the bottom for hours at a time, looking for anomalies. Pulse induction systems look for non-ferrous objects, silver, gold, that kind of stuff. So that's what we're interested in more than anything else. And if you're really lucky, you end up finding one of these things. So this is a Spanish H real piece. It's a silver coin, the classic piece of 8. And then that's the day that you go from being a treasure hunter to a treasure finder.
Wow, that's incredible. Wow, it's just a dream, really. So we're still talking rebreathers. This is coming clean with a dirty dozen. We managed to scrounge a photo deep in the archives with you in the cis lunar hanging out in a precarious position. Let's get it out. Tell us a little bit about this story. I have to hear it.
Yeah. So this is a picture taken by my good friend Richard Pyle. So Rich and I, again, after my early kind of brush with rebreathers, Bill Stone was a real guy in the States. Dr. Bill Stone was a real guy that was doing work with rebreathers in cave diving. So he had developed a range of rebreathers. There were color projects, or the first one of those. And then he moved into Mexico in the spring systems down there. And he eventually developed the Mark IV rebreather, which became his kind of exploration unit of choice up until this point. Then Bill went through an exercise of trying to commercialize the product more than anything else. So Richie and I did early training with Bill. We stayed at his house for a week. We tried to kill ourselves through hypoxia training and stuff like that. And then the outcome of all that was the Mark V. So this is a shot. The Mark V was launched at one of the DEMA shows. I think we made 2 units for the show, so they're pretty much hand built. And Richie and I were involved in that. And then Bill very graciously allowed us to take them away and go diving. But the one thing he said to us as we left his place was, do not let these rebreathers out of your sight. So the first night that we got to Key West and got to Billy's place, we set up this photo and sent it to Bill. Look, we really are looking after your rebreathers. So that's where the picture came.
Excellent. I mean, obviously, you've been on the design team or built several rebreathers, the Ouroboros, the Sentinel, the Explorer, just to name a few. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about highlights, during all that process? Some good memories?
Yeah, so obviously it all really started with the Ouroboros for us. So again, this is my colleague Nick and myself. And Nick was the brains behind the electronics and software. I did some of the electromechanical stuff, mostly mechanical. I was chief test pilot, all that kind of thing, sorted out the training. Same thing then moved into the Sentinel, and the Sentinel now has been taken over by VMS. They've done some really cool improvements to it, and it's become something else now. So that's really good. Then I worked with AUP and Hollis in the States on the Explorer project for them. Fun little. Have you ever dived this unit, Aaron? I like it. It's a really fun little rig.
I was teaching it after you stopped by in Dahab, and you were showing us the prototype before it was launched. That was quite funny.
Okay. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I remember. Yeah. So anyway, there was this one. And then obviously the modern day me is all the military stuff we do. So Avon.
So that chat in itself is a whole show. But let's crack on with the topic. So you're obviously an author as well, Technical Diving from a Bottom Up. I think you gave me that book in 2012, but many of my students read that, and I think I have one of them online right now. Tim, he's describing the time he met you and me and Eric in Dahab and getting to read the book. So
there you go. Cool.
what was the process making the book, and why did you do it?
I was doing a lot of teaching at the time through my training company, and I just felt there wasn't a book that encompassed everything. There were lots of bits and pieces, and it's very naive to think you can ever write a book that does everything. But I started off with a couple of 100 pages, I think, launched that, and then within a year I realized.
All right, I think this happened during our preparation tonight. He's in Dorset, so he's got some very spotty internet. I believe Kev will be joining us probably within the minute as he tries to log back in. We do apologize, but I'll take the opportunity to remind you, and this is our last chance, we have 15-20 minutes left, to ask questions in the social media, in the comments in the live stream. So we can ask Mr. Kev directly any questions you have about his career, building the CCRs, his expeditions, you name it. Richie's commenting, this happened to me as well. Okay, yeah. Well, there must be a high bandwidth going on in this time, since we're all on the inside. And of course, this is something that would happen on the season finale of something, right? Oh, there we go. I think he's coming back. There he is. Bam! We made it happen again. Welcome back.
Oh. I think Richie had the same problem, didn't he, as well?
Yeah, he was just saying, just like. Anyway.
Yeah, I can see the abusive text now.
So you were saying about the book.
Yeah, so I then did what I thought was going to be a small edit, which was about another 120 pages more, I think, in the end. And it was more just I wanted to get stuff out there, and I wanted to be able to, in the classes that I taught, give a little bit more than anything. I think that was a real reason for doing it. And the cool thing about the second edition was, I had a lot of really good friends, explorers, obviously in their own right, that put a lot of work in as well. The whole sections from different people. So it really made it something. I think it's not something I heavily promote at all. I'm rubbish at that kind of stuff. But it's still out there, and I bump into it every now and again. It's kind of nice,
So since we're talking a little bit about the community, I mean, as we all know, the diving community is pretty amazing. It's a lot of fun going to trade shows and meeting the people that are the glue of our industry. And just to mention one of them, obviously Michael Menduno is credited with bringing tech diving to the forefront of the media. How have you and Michael kind of collaborated over the years, and what were the early tech diving conferences like?
Well, obviously, Mikey lived in Key West and was really good friends with Billy and used to dive with Billy. So I think that was kind of the first time I really met him. And then when all the tech diving stuff kicked off at the first conference, and then he started the proper tech shows in the US, and they were just amazing places to go to. You had all the key people that are doing all the mainstream tech diving there, and physiologists. Dr. Bill Hamilton was sort of key to us all at that point. He helped us with decompression profiles, with his decap system, all that. So these people all just became friends, and you could walk around and ask anyone a question, and get good information. And if you wanted people to go on a project, they were all kind of there waiting. It was great. So Mike and I did a bit more together when we started running the shows in the UK. My wife Mandy and I ran INTD UK for a while after Rob Palmer and Richard Bull kind of stopped working with it. So Mandy did a lot of work putting the shows together, and I mean a lot of work putting the shows together. And they were great. They were fantastic events. Sometimes some of the American guys would come over. Tom came a few times. Billy even came once, which was great as well. So Mike helped with that. Gave us advice. And then Mike dropped out for a while of the whole technical diving scene, and then eventually came full circle. So it's been really nice that he's come back into it, and he's dragging up all the old fossils and the old photographs and embarrassing us all, and it's really good. It's really good. Nice to see him back.
So can you tell us maybe a little bit, since you guys have quite a background in how the industry has developed, how do you think the tech diving industry demographic and the people have changed kind of over the years?
Well, like I said earlier, initially I think it was everyone in the room was an explorer in their own right. They were a cave diver, they were a deep wreck diver, they were going to the next limit, kind of stuff. And now the equipment has got so much better, through the early stuff that we helped some of the big manufacturers develop, the heating systems, the lighting systems, the camera systems, the breathing systems, and the kit's got so much better. So now it's about spreading that word out to a wider audience, a wider generation. The training has improved massively, the safety has improved massively, and it's just opened it up to a much, much bigger audience that wouldn't necessarily even thought about it. And now it's almost that, air is the dirty word in a way now. Why are you not diving nitrox? Are you crazy or something? So it's great that it's gone that way, I think.
Excellent. So we have a few more topics to cover. We obviously worked on quite a few movie and TV productions. I remember us filming the Monty Halls in Dahab together once. But you've done many other projects. Which one were your favorites?
The series with Monty was quite fun. I liked, especially the Dahab one was a little weird with the Arab princess and all that kind of thing going on. But the one we did in Namibia was really cool. There were some amazing sinkholes out in the bush out there. That was quite interesting. Any of the TV stuff that involves history, archaeology, you can see from the bookcase here, I've got a lot of history stuff going on. And Richie, don't forget, I've got your book as well. So yeah, a lot. Anything to do with history is big on me. So we did a few years ago. We did a lot of research on the Battle of Jutland, and we took up forensic scientists with us up there and did a lot of footage up there, trying to find out why the British ships sank so much quicker than the German ships. So that was a really, really interesting exercise. Not particularly technical, the dives are 40, 50, 60 meters, but reasonably long. And a lot of the time I end up either being a dive supervisor or I'm on the camera. The picture you've just pulled up there is actually from a project I did with Jill Heinrich. So Jill and I cooked this thing up. Again, it started with me in history. And there was a guy in World War I called Captain Claude H. Williams, a British Army officer who's actually a Kiwi. And he mapped the Western Desert in North Africa and Egypt down to the edges of the Sahara. Obviously, he mapped it for the British military, but I managed to come across his memoirs and his handwritten maps and all that kind of thing. So I tried to then tie that with something that Nat Geo might be interested in and what might be interested in, might have interest from a diving perspective. So we found that around a place called Siwa, there was a lot of natural water coming out of the ground. Now, some of it was because of boreholes, like the one you see there, just briefly. What's weird about the water is when it hits the surface, because of tectonic pressure, it's nearly boiling. You can pretty much make a cup of tea out of the water. So basically, we persuaded Nat Geo to fund us on a little recon project where we would combine all the things I love: military history, diving, dirt bikes, the desert, cameras. It was heaven. So we basically went out into the desert and ran around looking for these what we thought were going to be sinkholes from all the aerial photography. But the bottom line is they weren't. They were where the hot water naturally came up through the sand, and it creates almost a vertical hole, a water column, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's a very, very strange phenomena. And the locals obviously tapped the water source, and Siwa is where most of Egypt's water comes from, fresh water. So it's really cool to do that as an event. Sadly, at the same kind of time, we never went back, because as we landed on day one, the Arab Spring happened, the Arab uprising, and Egypt went mad, the Libyan border collapsed, all those kind of things. There were gunships running around out in the desert at night. So, but we had a great time. So.
And since we're kind of coming to the end of our talk, I think I would like to kind of look back. And if you kind of look back to the beginning of your diving and until today, and I know this is a hard question, Kev, but what do you reckon? What's your best diving experience to date?
They're all amazing for different reasons. That's the problem, you know. As the pure heart-stopping one is always just Britannic. Always just that first dive with a couple of us in the water, 3 of us in the water, and that first image. That always has got to come back as the kind of heart-stopper one. Other than that, then anything that involves some kind of exploration, some kind of discovery, if you like, you know, whether it's a treasure dive or a historical fact-finding dive and video and all those sort of things. So there's just so many. It's just so many. And you can't forget Titanic in that either.
Yeah, of course. So when we're looking at today, you know, we're talking about the military aspect of things. I know there's probably not much you can tell us about it, but what kind of projects? Or we have a small video maybe we can show. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, 5 or 6 years ago, I joined up with Avon Protection, and they wanted to develop a series of underwater systems to support the military. So one of the prime focus of that was the MCM 100 rebreather. So this is just a little promo clip for the rebreathers. Casey from Suex there.
Yeah, you and Rasmus as well.
We work with a range. Yeah, that's right. Myself and Rasmus, yeah. Rasmus actually works with me on a lot of these teaching exercises that we do, and Greg Such as well. So now I get to help design these things. We have an engineering team in Poole that puts all these things together. I get to help them design that, again, on the usual test pilot thing. And then I go out and support militaries around the world to get this system trained and embedded. So it's not a bad day job, really.
You can say that again. So what do you think kind of the future holds for you, Kev? You know, you've dedicated your whole life to discovery and exploration. Is there anything you're looking forward to? Is there, you know, when you say something like being on the Britannic in that time, you know, is there anything anywhere left to dive where you can find experiences like that? Do you still believe that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the next project has always got the potential to be amazing. So absolutely. There's one particular thing that I'm looking at the moment, which is something that I've done in the past, but not done successfully. And we're looking at going back to that in the next year or so. And I don't really want to say what it is at the moment, but so if that comes off, that will again be amazing, you know. So there's always the next thing. It's nice to look back and it's nice to see those things, but it's a lot more fun to plan ahead.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And there's going to be a date and a year where I'm going to drag you to Bikini. It's going to happen.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I nearly went there. The flights all closed down the year we were going, and I ended up getting diverted and spending 3 weeks in truck, which was amazing in itself. In fact, we took the first rebreathers to truck, and we really knocked it out of the diving. It was fantastic.
Wait, what year was that?
It was the Robertses. I can't remember. It's 2000, maybe, something like that.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we kind of ran out of time already. There's lots of people sending lots of love to you down the line. So I guess this is it. This is our last interview for the series. And Kev, it's just been a pleasure to spend this hour chatting with you and going through a remarkable career.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, guys. Appreciate it.
So without any further ado, I'll see you on the flip side, brother. Looking forward to our next dive together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
See you in a bit. Okay, everyone. So like I said, this was our last guest for season 1 of Coming Clean with the Dirty Dozen, Mr. Kevin Gurr, a good friend of ours. We're going to be taking a bit of a break now. To be honest, making 2 episodes a week was a lot more demanding than we anticipated. So there's a bit of a summer hiatus going to come on. However, we will be having a couple of specials during the summer, which we will announce very much ahead of time. And then, as we're planning now, there will be a season 2 with an amazing lineup, which we are discussing already. And when we get closer to knowing everything, we'll announce it in due course. Obviously, this episode and the previous episodes are available on our YouTube channel, also on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, and all these platforms. Remember to press the subscription bell and whatever these YouTubers remind you to do. Thanks for joining us for this series and being with us through this adventure. I've loved being able to reach out to the diving community and just having fun, really. It's kept me sane during this weird period. So without any further ado, I'm your host, Aron Arngrimsson. Stay safe in these less wilder times. Take care of yourself and each other. And if you feel lonely, we're here to chat dirty. See you later, guys.